Okay. On the day of love and romance, we're exploring history's most seductive monsters. But the real vampires were far from charming figures pop culture sold us on. Welcome back to The Common Historian, where history meets the supernatural. I'm Jeremy, and tonight, D.A. Wysong and Ronald Murphy Jr. return to separate vampire folklore from fiction. So grab your favorite beverage, dim the lights, and let's sink our teeth into the truth. Welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be here. And I hope your
Oh,
fans are eating something with garlic in it because that would be appropriate.
Oh yeah.
definitely. And get their crucifixes out too.
That's right.
Oh
That's right.
yes. Yes. And if the modern vampires, they sparkle. So, you know.
That's right. They're not like our good old fashioned vampires that we grew up with.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the last time that we were on together, we talked about this episode. So, just starting out, what actually defines a vampire kind of in historical folklore versus what we see on TV with our sparkling ones?
You do the honors, Ron.
But yeah, no, that was an excellent question. I like, at what point does the definitive vampire take over? And I think whenever you look over the vast history of what a vampire is, it changes, right? In our modern culture of, as you said, the sparkling vampires, they would be completely unknown even 100 years ago, right? I mean, that much has changed. But I think the one hallmark of a vampire, the one thread that runs, concurrently through any generation, is the idea that this is an entity that must drink human blood in order to survive. And it's that feeding process. It's that almost like parasitic aspect that makes these creatures so unbelievably terrifying, right? They look like us. They are really indeed who we are, right? They have just somehow were able to de-evolve to the point that they have to prey upon their own in order to survive.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So, what cases are you guys kind of the most familiar with when it comes to vampires?
I like to be on your show so much there, Jeremy, is I like to look at the history of it, right?
Yeah.
Because none of this stuff exists in a vacuum. And as we start our archaeological process and we start peeling back the skins of that proverbial onion and try to get to the core, we can go back probably, 12,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, at a time whenever, glaciers were taking over the world. This was a time of megafauna. And we could actually zero into a particular place in England, of all places. So if we go back roughly 14,000 years ago, this is right at the end of the glacial maximum. So after this time, the glaciers will start retreating. But at one point, England, the British Isles, was almost completely covered in glacier, and at this time there was also megafauna like bear and woolly rhino and lions and saber tooths and all this stuff. It wasn't a very hospitable place for human beings to be at that particular time. Actually, in the archaeological record, some scientists call this time the time of the living dead, because essentially what was going on is the human population that existed in the British Isles at this time was barely hanging on, and there were more people dying than were being born. So if we take a snapshot of that particular era, we can see that the human being is in pretty dire strait. It's not looking very good to this naked little animal that's running around next to mammoths, So food was scarce. It was difficult to hunt and kill anything of that size. But people were living. And one of the ways people were living is really a great representation of how they were living is in a place called Go's Cave, which is in Cheddar Gorge. So if you eat your cheddar cheese, this is where it gets its name from. One of the oldest human beings ever discovered was in the Cheddar Gorge area. It's a tourist attraction now. But again, we go back 14,000 years ago. The glaciers are right outside the door. And these are caves where people were living to get warm and to stay away from predators. because of course at this point we're at the bottom of the food chain. But what makes this location so vampiric, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, is that in Go's Cave was a site where animal carcasses were being processed. You know, there was some reindeer, there were some horses. So there was a processing place where people living at that particular time would take their prey, take it underground so, you know, things don't steal it from them. And there they would process the food. Now, among these animals, among the horses and the deer and such, they come across 3 human beings. One of them was adult, one of them was an adolescent, and one was a child. And the remains were processed in the exact same way as the other animals, right? There was no reverence for what was going on here. They were simply food items. Now, to go even deeper into this, archaeologists have also discovered that there were a couple of goblets that were formed out of a human skull. And inside those goblets was residue of human blood. And it's essentially what was going on there. Some people say it's ritualistic, but I think whenever you look at the overall aspect, I think what was going on there was cannibalism simply for the sake of survival. And we know from the human historical record, when things get rough, people will start eating other people, and they'll even start ingesting human blood, thinking that that will give them some sort of strength. But in essence, though, it poisons the system. Human blood in our system is not a good thing. You know, we get sick from it, and we could actually die from it. So we know that going back 14,000 years ago, that there was a group of individuals, a tribe, that would leave the confines of their cave, go out into the world, and prey upon the weakest around us, right? So we have cannibalism, but you also, from this very point, have an echo of what will become the vampire legend, right? Things that rise up out of the ground. Because at this time, people were often buried in caves, right? It keeps their bodies safe from predators. So, you know, their ancestors don't have to see, you know, something eating, you know, Uncle John or anything like that. So people were often buried in caves. And so if you think about it this way, if we go back 14,000 years ago, and the only safety we have is around this campfire, right? And then out of the darkness, you know, one of our young children are taken away and we never see them again. Or if somebody's brave enough to follow them, we see that they're taken into the caves. And so it already has this claim of association with death, right? Something's rising up out of the ground. Also, that's where bats live as well, too. So we have this connection with vampires and bats from very, very, very early on as well, too. And for the human psyche to kind of make some sort of sense of this, because nobody wants to admit that fellow men are preying upon each other. So we have to project the monster onto the canvas, right? So instead of people coming out of these caves at night preying upon other people, it's much better for the human psyche to suggest that these are monsters, because it makes a little bit more sense. And really from that time, and this is just one instance in England, right? And you know, we can find evidence of cannibalism all over the world at this time, because it was a rough going. So you take that and you multiply this instance by maybe 100 times, maybe 1,000 times, to the point that it becomes part of our collective unconscious, right? It becomes an archetype. You know, we might not remember it as if it was a souvenir of a bygone time, but something in our DNA resonates with us, right? There's some sort of terror that we have, that whenever the night falls, that something out there could prey upon us. This is not something that should continue with us into 2026, right? But we still have that fear. I mean, every time we look out that window and the sun has set, even if we live in a neighborhood or in the city, we look out there and we think, what could be out there lurking in the shadows? And it's my point of view, from a sociological and a psychological perspective, that part of that fear that we have of the unknown springs about from these particular times, whenever the unknown came out of the shadows to prey upon us.
I didn't know that either. That's really interesting with the chatter.
Yeah, It's an interesting site because the Go Cave site at the Cheddar Gorge, you have to go down like, a quite an embankment inside this. Like the tunnel is about 3 feet long. So in order to get to this place where this tribe was hanging out was quite the journey. So it's probably nobody probably even came in contact with them because they were that deep within the cave system. So it was somebody coming out of the shadows to hunt other people. That's all it was in this particular case. Ever since I came across that, I thought, there's something here, right? And 95% of archaeology takes place in a library. So the more I read, the more I can start connecting the dots and see, well, vampires did not come into creation fully formed. It took a while before they developed into the archetype that we have now. But it was essentially the fear of the unknown, something that happened at night, and probably most importantly, it was something that fed upon the weakest of our kind, right? The children. And from that time onward, the idea of the vampire has been plaguing us ever since.
I think another really critical point we have to consider too, that might really kind of like just lay in the subconscious of our collective conscious, is that when you cross that line where you're devouring another human being, that takes away your humanity, So there's that embedded fear that, something like that could come upon you and actually turn you into something like that.
Right. So, that's a good point too.
Yeah.
And there are examples of this as well too, because not only do we find cases of human predation, right, and human consumption of their own kind in order to stay alive, but we also see the flip side of this as well too. There are archaeological sites in Italy. There's really sporadically throughout Europe, the whole way into the Middle East. We can see that there were, I guess you would call them Stone Age vampire hunters, for lack of a better term, because in cultures that are separated by time and space, something happened that was very similar. And that is that these groups of people, this culture, would go where burials were taking place and exhume certain individuals. They most always were men between the ages of 30 and 40 years old. And they would take these individuals, they would dig them up, and they would smash in their skulls. And we know that this has happened. Like I said, there's archaeological evidence of this peppered through Europe and into the Near East. And it appears, and of course we can only guess at this because there's no written record, but we can only guess that the living feared the dead, that they were going to rise up. So they would exhume those people that they thought were the perpetrators, and they would crush in their skulls, hoping that they would never again rise from the grave.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's extremely interesting, I think, whenever you take a look at this, because like I said, these are separate cultures. This is not the same culture, yet they had the same idea that this body here that we have after death, there was a little bit of still fear attached to it, right? That something could still reanimate it and do damage to the living. And I think that is a terrific insight into how we human beings think. But it's also a very scary thing, too, to think that we have been fearing the dead for thousands of years.
Well, and it also reminds us how powerful the collective consciousness is. It is a real thing. It is a real fabric that ties all of us together, no matter where we are in the world. That's the connective measure instead of the internet, or the satellite. It's embedded in us, in our DNA.
Yeah. This idea of a cultural memory, right? Or, what could be called the deep grammar as well, too. We call them vampires or wild man or lake monsters or whatever kind of paranormal pursuit you may have. But at the end of the day, there's a deep grammar to them, and they mean something in a language all of their own. They speak to us in certain ways that it instills fear. There's an evocativeness to it as well, too. But it also really kind of makes us more human, right? We fear the unknown because these things are believed to be out there, and we still carry that memory with us even now. And I think that anytime we do any any communication regarding the paranormal, the metaphysical, the cryptozoological, whatever. I think if we don't address Carl Jung and his idea of the collective unconscious, we're doing a terrible disservice to the field, because all of us as investigators out there, whether we're boots on the ground or we're passively investigating, whatever the case may be, we must give recognition to Carl Jung in his idea that we're all bound together by the same archetypes, the same kind of unconscious language, which indeed is the case, because we have Bigfoot here, we have the Yeren in China, the Yeti in the Himalayas, right? And even in Australia, we have the Yowie. So the idea that there are things out there. Now, check this out.
Absolutely.
Same way with the vampire, right? So we have in Europe, parts of the Eastern Europe, we have the Strigoi, which acts very differently from the typical vampire that we might have in the British Isles or whatever. But they still follow the same rules. They're still close enough in substance that we can understand the rules by which they abide. So all of these creatures, no matter what we're talking about, they all exist in that collective unconscious because they meant something so much to our ancestors that kernel is still planted within us today.
I agree.
And so if you look at Nosferatu, the new movie, which I personally didn't care for. I thought it was kind of slow. It was beautiful to look at, but I was not a huge fan. I actually like the original one. But if you look at Nosferatu, and especially the way the director focused in on the way it ate, it was very animalistic, and that's what the Strigoi did. So if we would go back in time and we would talk to Vlad the Impaler, right? Many people think that Dracula was based upon him. He would have immediately recognized the Nosferatu, and he would not have recognized the Bela Lugosi vampire, right? Because the Strigoi was a predator like that, right? It would eat over the human heart, or it would actually eat in the face. It was a creature that had no romance to it at all. It was there for the lifeblood, and that was it. So, even like I said, even though this has been a cultural memory that's been going out there for thousands of years, it still is with us today, and people are still making movies about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder how much diseases like tuberculosis and rabies played into the whole thing.
Actually, the book I wrote,
Jeremy, you're
Monster Hunters of America, the Jewett City vampire did play very much into that tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Jeremy, that's an excellent question.
It was in Connecticut where there were several cases, and they literally confirmed some cases where they could see that the blood was they weren't deteriorating in the graves.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you can go to New England right now, places like Connecticut and Massachusetts and Rhode Island,
Mm-hmm.
and you can visit the grave of a vampire. And you know how you know it's a grave of a vampire? Because it says this is the grave of a vampire, because they saw tuberculosis as almost a monstrous visitation of some kind. And what's another word for tuberculosis? Another word for tuberculosis is consumption. Because it appeared as if something was consuming the human body, right? Something was feeding upon it. It didn't make any sense. Now, so we could talk about the New England vampire wave, which took place in, this isn't ancient history either. This is the 1800s, right? And one of my favorite cases is the case of Mercy Brown, which took place in Exeter, Rhode Island. And she died in 1892, which is ridiculous, because my great-grandmother was born in 1890, and I knew her as a kid, right? So she was born at the same time this happened. Now, I'm going to set a little bit of historical relevance to this thing. So in 1892, the first professional football game was played, right? Baseball was already about 20 or 30 years old, playing professionally. So that's old hat, right? This was already after the Civil War. The Cowboys out west are going on. So this is a pretty, new world we're stepping into. This isn't the ancient world at all, right? This is also the time of Walt Whitman, right? The poet. And he was even talking about the supernatural that was running amok because the scientific mind was not overriding the superstitions. but people thought there were vampires everywhere. And one of the things, just like DA said, it was tuberculosis. And this one girl named Mercy Brown, she died. Now, a lot of people die, but what was odd is that other members of her family were dying as well, and her brother now was sick. So obviously, according to the imagination back then, something had to be spreading this illness. And instead of thinking it was somebody's cough or was something, viral heading through the air, they thought somebody must be actually visiting our family. There's a plague upon our family. There is some sort of monster that is cursing our family. So like any good father, Mr. Brown and some of the neighbors, they gathered some shovels together and they decided they were going to go down and dig up Mercy Brown, right? To find out what was going on. Now, she passed away in the wintertime. And this winter in New England was one of the worst, maybe one of the worst ever witnessed in human history up in that area. This 1892, the game of basketball was invented in Boston. And the reason it was invented is because it was too cold to play outside anything. So somebody had to invent the game so we could still be active indoors. So as people were starting to play around with basketball, we have a dad and some townsfolk digging up the guy's daughter, all right, to find out if she was a vampire, right? So they dig her up, and lo and behold, she still has blood in her body, right?
Did she have a basketball in her coffin?
No, not yet. That's the next story. So, she had blood coming out of her mouth. She was bloated. She obviously was feeding upon the people, right? So, no, they don't understand that her body has been frozen, right? Everything is intact. It has not started any decomposition yet. So basically, you have a bloated, frozen corpse out there. But of course, the mind is playing tricks on them. And the guy's remedy is that you would remove Mercy's heart and you would burn it over a fire until it became ashes. And then you would take those ashes, put it into a cup, and then the son who was sick then would drink it. And that's what they did. They took out Mercy's heart and still had blood in it. Makes perfect sense, right? But lo and behold, the son, whose name was Edmund, he dies. So poor Mercy Brown was exhumed and eviscerated, and her brother ended up dying. But a couple of years ago, I got to visit Mercy Brown's grave in Exeter, Rhode Island. Yeah, it's a beautiful place, but it's very melancholy there as well, too. It's very sad to think that, this young girl who was about 19 years old actually lived at a time where, again, this is, a fairly modern world where she was still dug up because her family thought that she was a vampire. And this all goes back to tuberculosis. Whenever things happen and people don't have the scientific knowledge to put it all together, very bad things happen. And that probably is one of the reasons why garlic is now a beneficial repellent for the vampire. Now, I did a lot of research on why garlic worked. And, there's a lot of theories out there that, was used as an antiseptic, which indeed it probably was. But then I came across something in a medical journal that talked about the use of garlic in ancient Egypt. A doctor had done a lot of research on this, and she discovered through textual records that, infant mortality rates were unbelievably high. And as we can see back in Go's cave, that children were often believed to be the ones on which vampires fed. So it was very important that you keep your children healthy. And the only way that you keep your child healthy in the ancient world is by feeding, right? Nursing was the only way these children were going to live. And it would be terrifying if you had a child that would not nurse. Because if your child's not nursing, it's a good chance that it's not going to survive, right? It's not like you can take it down to the pediatrician, or it's not like you can go down and give it a milk substitute. If the child does not live off of its mother, it is going to die. So what the Egyptians did was they used garlic to rub it on the mother's breast to stimulate the nursing reflex in the baby. So the child, now with the mother using garlic, would now eat. And think about this. So the child that lived down the street, whose mother did not use the garlic and died, well, goodness, they didn't have any idea of sudden infant death syndrome or anything like that. So obviously what had happened was the garlic kept these monsters at bay. I think it's a pretty good conclusion there. That's a little bit of the research that I did. And I kind of, because it makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, it really, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yes.
Yeah, because this wasn't in some sort of book about vampires. I had to look up a lot of information on breastfeeding, and you could have discovered my search history. But it led me to be able to get this book out, and I really I thought that was an interesting conclusion. Yeah.
That is, when you were writing for your book, what kind of approach did you take with the vampire?
Well, of course, they're monster hunters and they're hunting monsters. So we went with the vampires, Pardon? Oh, I thought somebody said something.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, I went with the vampires.
There's just some lag.
I went with the vampires. And actually, I traced the vampire lineage back to a biblical text. I went really wild and took a lot of curves. And I actually presented the original vampire, which I brought back to Cain and Abel. And so that's the way I went with the Jewett City vampire. It started out in Connecticut, but then it went back into biblical times and even touched base with Mesopotamia, because there's some legends with that and myths and lore with that as well. I mean, really vampires infiltrate all the way through so many different cultures, like what Ron was just saying. And so then I tied it into the 13 bloodlines that are supposedly the powers that be that run the planet. So that's how they, that's how they're immortal, and they keep, they're running the show through their immortality of vampirism. So,
I love that aspect. I did
a little bit of research with the biblical text with Cain. It was interesting that in my book he has the mark of the mark of Cain, which I thought was interesting, because really that was when I delved deeper into the Old Testament. They were basically, God was wanting to punish him by living for a really long time, which some people would consider that immortality. Because even immortals die eventually, they just die. They live longer than a mortal does, but they do die eventually. That's the sign of Cain actually protected him to where he was, and then he started feeding on the blood in the book. So that's where I went.
We have to make biblical connections. We have to, because that is truly, that is how you combat, vampires nowadays as well too. And the reason why that is because it does have a biblical connection. Now, one of the first vampires that appears in Judaic literature, and this goes back to a commentary on Jewish tradition, but that goes the whole way back again, as DA said, back to the Garden of Eden. And we have the story where the first wife of Adam was not Eve. Eve was taken from the rib and she was made out of the husband, right? So we have another tradition that there was the first wife of Adam, and she was made from the same mud and dust as Adam, right? So she's consubstantial with Adam. They're made from the same substance. One's not better than the other. They're both on equal footing. And Adam does not like this. Now, of course, this reflects a patriarchal civilization, right? This is where the man is in charge and the woman has little or no say. But we get a glimpse of what it would have been like at a particular time whenever women were at least trying to vie for some sort of cultural independence, right? So in this story, Adam and Lilith are happily together, I suppose. But he still wants to be in charge in every way, right? He wants to even control sexuality. And as the commentary goes, Lilith wants to initiate sexual congress, shall we say, and she wants to take a superior role, and she wants to be on top. I hope we can say this here. You know, we're all adults.
I think hey, we are talking about Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So hopefully this gets you guys in the mood. So she wants to take a superior position, and Adam will have none of this. Apparently he's quite vanilla. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but he's somehow turned off by this woman who wants to take control. And he goes to God and he says, "Yo, God, what's going on here?" This woman is kind of wanting to be a little bit too masculine here, right? She's kind of overextending her welcome, and God agrees with him, and then she is cast out of Eden. So according to this worldview, we have a garden in the middle of an abyss. There's nothing else around. It's all blackness and darkness and decay. And that is the world into which Lilith is thrown. And in that abyss, in that darkness, she encounters either a fallen angel by some traditions, or she encounters Lucifer himself, right? And they then join team, right? Lucifer hates God.
Lucifer.
It was, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So Lucifer hates God, right? He left heaven. He, as Milton would say, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. So we have the same thing then with Lilith as well too. She says, now, for what God has done to me and what Adam has done for me, we are going to have children, and for eternity, our children are going to be preying upon the offspring of Adam and whoever else he commingles with. So at that point in our vampiric evolution, we see that a created human being is now interacting with a demon to produce hybrid demon children that are going to stay alive simply by feeding on the offspring of human beings.
Ron, I love that you brought Lilith up, because when in my book, in the Jewett City Vampires, when Cain is cast out into exile, which is darkness and bleak, and he's, roamed the desert by himself for a very long time, guess who he comes into?
That's right.
And Lilith presents the blood to him. So in my book, she actually is vampiric, and she changes him. He accepts it, he drinks it, and that is where the chain of command goes down. And then when he goes on to build the city of Enoch, it's a whole vampire city. The whole city is vampiric. They're all, he brings, cool. He finds all the wayward people that have nothing, that have been in the same boat that they've been in. And that's what they do. They build the city of Enoch, and they're actually a city of vampires.
I think that's fantastic. I love it. They should make a movie about that.
I think so.
So, is there any connection between vampires and Valentine's Day, or is that kind of a thing?
I think the story of Saint Jerome, I think, is a lot to do with that. Don't you, Ron? The history of Saint Jerome. I think I wrote another book of one of my creeper keepers that was the Vampire Darkness, and this is stationed in New Orleans. And there actually is some legend with Saint Jerome down there. And I did a lot of research on that particular subject, and I really do think that Saint Jerome very well could have been, what they would consider a pretty much a modern day vampire. And and it's funny that whole particular area in New Orleans has adapted, their version of vampirism, where they go get the teeth, and everybody wants to be a vampire. Everybody wants to be a witch. Everybody's into the darkness. And I think it stems from the coffin girls and everything that's really heavily, historical with the Saint Jerome. I mean, when they finally, I don't know if everybody knows what the story of Saint Jerome is, but it's kind of like he was a count, and he was very romantic and aristocratic, and he was like top of the, high elite. And, you know, he would have all these outrageous parties and orgies. And that's where you get the, you know, the sexuality, I think, of vampirism in there. And it was very seductive. And he would wine and dine all these. It wasn't just women, it was men too. But, you know, at the end of the day, when it all went down, and, you know, basically one woman just basically had to jump off of a balcony at the end after years of this. And she went to the police and said that, you know, he tried to suck my blood out of my neck, and she had puncture wounds on her neck. And when they went in to raid his house that he had inhabited for very many years, you know, just coming across as this really wealthy man and having all these parties and stuff, they found hundreds of bottles of wine in his wine cellar. There was no wine in any of it. It was all wine. It was all blood.
Oh.
And he was never to be seen again. He just disappeared.
Yes, he
and that was during the same time when the French came in with the coffin girls, you know, and there was a lot, and there was people that even in the, I think it was in the 70s, there were some murders right there in front of that building.
Well, even today, the murder capital of the United States has been for a while. It's been New Orleans.
Oh, yeah. I mean, do vampires exist? I mean, you know, worse, stranger things could happen. I mean, it's like everybody wants to be a vampire these days, but are they immortal? No. But do they drink? I mean, there are actually people that want to consume blood, and they actually, I think it's on a seductive tone. Don't you, Ron?
Well, sure. And so if somebody would come up to me and say, does vampires exist? I would say, most definitely, because there are many people that identify as vampires, right? They even go as far as putting the fake teeth in. And like you said, Jeremy, or your listeners or whomever, seems this is going to be a, you know, a Valentine special. You know, if you were so in the mood and you wanted to suck somebody's blood, or you wanted to have somebody suck your blood, there are plenty of websites where you could go and have this done most readily, right? There are vampire bars in New Orleans and Tokyo and in New York, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. But there is a definite kink to the idea of the vampiric, right? A sadomasochist slant to it. And, you know, I might be into it a little bit too. It seems kind of interesting to me. But, you know, I'm just saying that there is an appeal there. There is an allure. There's a bit of an attraction there, because it is, you know, unbridled sexuality. It's getting down to the animalistic nature of who we are. And we can set reason aside for a little bit and just give into our indulgences, right? So with all that being said, in that regard, yes, there are people out there. But DA made a very soluble point a little bit ago whenever she talked about writing about Cain creating the city of Enoch with people that were, you know, on the periphery of civilization. And if we think about that now, the people that identify as vampires don't fit in anywhere else, right? They are forming groups of other people that have been disenfranchised as well. And if we look around the United States, in Kentucky, very recently, as a matter of fact, these vampire cults that get together, usually some, you know, teenager is a semi-charismatic leader that brings people together, so they form what they sometimes call a family or a clan, because these teenagers who do not belong anywhere else find belonging and acceptance within this very particular group. And out of that comes very heinous things, you know, usually murder or something along those lines, because you so identify with this idea of belonging, you let yourself go and you give over to that idea, and then you, for at least a while, become that vampire that you so want to be. we have a lot of instances where people kill other people and drink their blood because they believe that they're vampires. And I was just recently in Salem, Massachusetts, and you could go into various stores up there and you can get fitted fangs put on your teeth. So you can walk around with a, dental procedure and have some fangs. So there is that allure there. There's definitely that allure. But again, it is becoming and belonging to something that is taboo. It's always going to have a taboo nature whenever we talk about the vampiric.
And even when you were saying it, it could tie into a kink, because then you've got the dominance over the submissive, willing, participant to yield to that dark desire, which is seductive in itself.
Right. Right. Yeah. And if we think, because like I said, when we talk about the Strigoi and we talk about how vampires traditionally fed upon people, it wasn't, the bite of the neck. This was an animal attack, basically, right? They were trying to get in there, get the blood. That's what kept them alive. But then you get to the Victorian era, right, where we had to keep things a little bit quiet. They were very prudish in and of itself. And to look how prudish the Victorians were, whenever archaeology was really catching on, almost every figure that was found was considered a fertility figure because the Victorians just assumed that people were having sex all the time because they weren't, right? So they just assumed that was going on. But even whenever Bram Stoker was writing, he could not at that particular time talk about the sex act. But you can get pretty close if you talk about the penetration of teeth into a woman's neck, right? You still have that sense of intimacy and that sense of eroticism there as well too. So what we see in these books, in these writings, is the act of sexuality taking on a life of its own to the point that it becomes the way where human life is taken from you. And, this could also be representative of venereal disease, which I'm sure was seen throughout, this time as well, too. So all these diseases that we have, whether it's tuberculosis or rabies, venereal diseases, whatever the case may be, they can always be assigned to the vampire because it's something coming into your world. It's the foreigner usually, right? It's something to be feared. You let it into your house and then all bad things happen. So as I was writing my book on vampires as well, too, I did a lot of study on the plague because the plague was believed to be carried by vampires as well, too, at one point. And I came to this conclusion. Besides using garlic to stimulate nursing, I also discovered that, when we think about vampires, one of the rules is, you can't invite them in, right? Because once you invite them in, then they can come into your house at any time. And think about this. Think about whenever plague was running rampant, right? And we didn't know how it was spread. We had no idea what was going on. You could be having a party one day and your neighbor next door throwing up blood the next day and he's dead within 24 hours. So we didn't know what was going on. But could you imagine, and I'm sure this has happened many times, there's a knock at the door, you open the door, everybody is fine in your house, and a stranger needs food or needs something to drink, and you invite them in, and that's the carrier of a plague, then the stranger leaves within 24 hours, your house dies, right? Everybody's dead. I think that whenever we talk about that, not allowing a vampire to have admittance into your house, never invite them in, is because that comes back from a time whenever inviting a stranger into your house could it actually mean life or death for everybody under that roof if they were carrying the plague.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, and I have to tell you, even though it's corny now, but at the time when it came out, Salem's Lot, that scene where he is outside the window, just like floating around, it scared the shit out of me.
Well, it still scares me now.
And that's what I'm saying.
It still scares me now.
It's like that scene. Just because you knew that little boy was human, and him just floating around wanting to come in, and you couldn't let him in.
Exactly. Asking his friends, can I come in? Can I come in? Right. And there was a book, I think it was a Finnish book or a movie called Let the Right one in, which was basically the same kind of idea that this little kid's friend was a vampire and was a girl, and
I
she kept
remember
on
that.
wanting
They're
to be
playing
let
in
in.
the schoolyard on the swings.
Yes,
That was
yes.
scary.
It was scary. It was scary. Yes.
And you know what? That also has an undertone, that particular movie, about not fitting in anywhere, because he didn't fit
Sure.
in, she didn't fit in,
Sure.
and that's where they met, not fitting in. You know,
That's right.
again,
Yeah,
into exile.
that's
where
right.
they
There's a
found
good
each other.
movie called there's a good movie out called Byzantium, which is about that as well too. Really amazing movie as well. I cannot believe how quickly the time has flown here. It seems like we just got on this thing and we've already been going for like 50 minutes. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I
Oh, I
love
know.
it.
Yeah.
We haven't even got to crucifixes, holy water, or mirrors yet.
Oh, I know.
Right. Yeah.
So the one question that and DA probably brought up something that, stuff that we haven't covered here, but what's the most misunderstood aspect of vampire folklore that, modern day pop culture and movies have gotten completely wrong?
I think it's the seduction and, how appealing they look, and they were hideous. The original ones were they were, like he said, animalistic and hideous, and it was nothing like what you would want to put on your, table for Valentine's Day at all. It's be something you wouldn't want to even acknowledge that. I mean, you would be very frightened. I think the big thing is back then people were really frightened of that. And these days they embrace it, and it's seductive, and they want to be it. I mean, I don't think back then anybody wanted to be a vampire.
No, I don't think that's the case. Yeah. And I think the biggest takeaway is that the belief that, they can only come out at night, because vampires traditionally had been creatures of the daytime as well, too.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Well, you got Blade Runner,
Yeah, but he was kind of a hybrid, it's hard just to say he wasn't a pure vampire.
Right.
He was a daywalker.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have the other, Ron and I talked about this the last time we spoke, about how, like in Dr. Sleep, where Stephen King presents the vampirism as an energy. We have all heard of the energy vampires, and I think those are very, very well and alive. I mean, I think that happens every day, all day long. People sometimes knowingly will pretty much, they can walk in the room and they can just steal your essence, like you can literally feel your energy being pulled. I mean, that's a really real thing. And I think we would have to put that under the same category as vampirism, even though it's not a physical vampiric nature. It's a spiritual?
More of a spiritual.
Yeah. Spiritual vampirism.
Sure. Yeah.
And they feed on the energy.
I think that we go forward
energy
in our culture.
because they're empty.
Right. And I think as we go forward as a society, it's going to make sense for people to start aligning themselves with something called an elemental vampire, where they actually draw their power from the world around them, whether it's, a thunder and lightning storm or from trees, but it's a very kind of new age consciousness. And they're really not evil creatures at all. They just feel that they can only stay alive by drawing power from the natural world around them. So they're not drinking blood or anything like that. They're simply using themselves as kind of a conduit to draw in energy from the world itself.
Well, in witchcraft, that is what you do. When you see a storm, you go out under a storm and you draw the energy in. So that is classic.
I would get struck.
Water or fire or earth.
Yes.
Now, with the vampire too, they're almost classified as kind of the demonic because of the crucifix and the holy water really play into that.
Yeah. If you go to the University of Pennsylvania, however, you can find prayer bowls that were either hung up in Mesopotamian households were placed out on tables, and they were prayers to keep Lilith at bay. And this is coming from a pagan society. So we know that from very early on, there were prayers and amulets that were being worn well before Christianity took hold of everything. And of course, that's just a continuation of everything. So it went from, pagan talismans to Catholic crucifixes. And that's just because we're then living in a, medieval world, which was a Christian culture. And just on any Christian culture, it was a specifically a Catholic culture. And in that world, we have all these kind of paraphernalia that goes along with it.
Yeah.
So, Ron, where do you think the driving of the stakes in the heart went? Do you think that was, back like in Transylvania when they were going to go, start digging up these graves? Do you think that was just kind of like a powers move to where we're just going to, instead of cutting it out and burning it, we'll just take the stake and, drive it into and that'll put a stop to them?
Yeah, so I have done research, but I found no corresponding written essays on this particular theory that I have, but I will just tell you right now. So we know that in Poland in the Middle Ages, you kept the vampire in by placing a rock in its mouth, right? And sometimes you would cut off its hand so it couldn't remove it. So even if it did rise out of the grave, it would be useless because it couldn't bite anything, right? And we know that there was people that were putting, saw blades over the neck of the dead in case it would rise up, it would take the head off. But my theory is this, and we never see the use of wood used fighting vampires until the Middle Ages, right? And my theory is this. My theory is that it duplicates the wood of the cross, and you actually are using that to connect the spirit back into the ground so it could never leave. Now, of course, I was unable to find any kind of research to corroborate this. This is simply my theory, what was going on, because you don't find it until you have a culture that's based upon Christianity.
Right.
Well, there's a sacredness to wood,
Yeah, and it's just the same thing when you're doing a clearing on a house or any kind of superstition. Anybody that comes in to do a clearing, like if you're having a haunting going on in your house, they're going to ask you first of all what your beliefs are. Belief is a very powerful thing. So whether you use a witch's ball or you're using a crucifix or they had the vampire kits, of course. But like Ron said, that was because the church pretty much was predominant over what everybody believed. So I think that has a lot to do with what Ron was saying with the rock in the mouth and the saw blade on the thing. And then it kind of evolved into the vampire kit. And then you have, the rest is history.
Yeah. So I know we are getting close to the end here. I wanted to give each of you, it's a little off vampire, I wanted to give each of you a chance to kind of let us know what you guys are, new projects you have and what you guys are up to.
You can go ahead, Ron.
DA is always busy. I was just saying, DA, I can wrap it up quickly in about 30 seconds. I'll give you the next few minutes because it takes you a while. She's always doing something.
I agree to publish another book. Go figure. It is going to be hunting for Tommy knockers in Colorado, and I'm super excited about the book. And Ron really has helped me a lot on the folklore and the origins of Tommy knockers, which is, if nobody knows, it's an elemental. So I'm excited about that. And then next month, I'll be starting on the hunting for Squonk, which the one and only Ron Murphy will be in that.
Oh,
and
that sounds exciting.
He will be meeting the monster hunters firsthand.
Oh,
so they're going to be at
great.
Chestnut Ridge, and
wait.
they're going to be exploring the Squonk. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I'm super excited.
I'll tell you, this is what we should do. If your Tommy Knockers book takes off and makes you millions of dollars, I say you, Jeremy, and I get together and we open up a strip club called Tommy Knockers.
I love it. Let's do it. And you could be the bouncer, Ron.
I will definitely. I will do anything. I'll be your employee. That's right. Yeah, but I'm excited about the Squonk book. I really am. because I love the squonk, and I actually wrote a book about the squonk. So
We're tell him
I
about
think
the
that this might
squonk
be
because
one of
we
the
got to get
only
that. We
books
got to
written
get the
about the
squonk
squonk.
out there. I don't think Jeremy knows about the squonk. Tell him a little bit about.
Oh,
the
we
squonk.
should come on the show and discuss the squonk sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's really set in a historical precedent as well, too. It's this creature that really has no place left to go, so it cries all the time. And if you capture it, it dissolves into a puddle of water. So you can never really, it's never a tangible thing. It's more of an idea. But I think that when we get closer, DA, to having your book come out, have us on the show. I would love to talk about the squonk for you for an hour.
I would love that. And Ron's
That'd be
written
awesome.
a book about the squonk as well.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the only books written about the squonk. Yeah.
I know. We're the chosen ones.
Yeah, we'll have to arrange that. Just let me know.
Yeah,
Ron,
this
what
one,
again,
I just want
Wes,
to.
thanks for having us on, Jeremy, and it was good to see you again, Ron.
Oh yeah. I wanted to apologize because I've been suffering from some lag here. Because here, I think every time I do a podcast, there's an ice storm of some kind. It seems like what's going on. But we're having a little bit of rough weather right here. But I'm getting into the metaphysical right now. I'm doing some metaphysical research and some self-help stuff going on. So my girlfriend and I, Heidi Penrose, we wrote a book about intimacy with intention. It has nothing to do with what you're thinking about, and this isn't any kind of sex book or anything. It's basically interpersonal relationships between people so you can make yourself happy and be happy in the relationship as well, too. I've been through a divorce, so I know that I'm not an expert at this, so I need all the help that I can. So that had come out, and I've also developed something called Sacred Touch. Again, this seems horribly sexualized, but it has nothing to do with it all. But I'm a Reiki master, and I've been studying and practicing Reiki for a while. And this is my own take on it, because in Reiki, we have no physical touch whatsoever. And I truly think that in order to heal somebody, you have to have that connection. So I wrote a whole book about that as well. So if you find that interesting, hop on over to Amazon.
Really interesting.
You can find me there. And if not, well, I appreciate that very, very much. And like I said, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here with you. And I'm so glad that this show went so well. And I hope the people like it. I really do.
Me too, Ron.
I'll make sure to put both of your Amazon author links in the description below.
Awesome.
And, your different websites and socials and stuff, I'll put them all down there as well. So if anyone wants to, check you guys out or buy some of your books, it'll be all there.
I know I'm going to buy Ron's book. I already downloaded the Sex Magic today. I'm excited.
Oh, fantastic. Well,
I'm going to write you a 5-star review too. Just saying. Because I know I'm going to
appreciate that. Yes.
I've got
for independent authors.
I've been so busy writing. So I'm going to read them soon.
Yeah, anybody that is an independent author, we really do rely upon people reviewing our book. So I appreciate that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So much, Jeremy, for having us on.
Oh, yes. This was fun diving into, the history of vampires and everything that goes along with them. So, I will, like I said, I will put all your links in the description below. And if you enjoyed this dark twist on Valentine's Day, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below, and make sure you share this with someone that, you believe would enjoy it. And just remember, history books close, but stories refuse to end. Keep exploring the shadows, and I'll see you on Wednesday.
Ciao. Yay, we did it